What if I told you that the largest tank battle in history wasn't just a clash of machines, but a final, desperate gamble that would decide the fate of an entire front? Thousands of tanks, millions of soldiers, and one last chance for Nazi Germany to turn the war around. This was the Battle of Kursk. By the summer of 1943, the war on the Eastern Front had reached a breaking point. Just months earlier, Germany had suffered a devastating defeat at Stalingrad. An entire army had been surrounded and destroyed. The myth of German invincibility was gone. But the war was far from over. Despite the loss, German forces still held vast territories deep inside the Soviet Union. And in the center of the front line, a massive bulge had formed around the city of Kursk. This bulge stretched hundreds of kilometers into German lines. To German planners, it looked like an opportunity. If they could attack from the north and south at the same time, they could surround and destroy the Soviet forces inside. It was a classic encirclement strategy, one that had worked many times before. Adolf Hitler approved the plan. It was called Operation Citadel. This would not be a small attack. It would be one of the largest offensives of the entire war. Germany gathered everything it could. Elite SS divisions were brought in. Experienced commanders were placed in charge. Thousands of tanks and assault guns were prepared for the assault. New weapons were introduced as well. The Panther tank, fast and powerful, was expected to dominate Soviet armor. The Tiger tank, heavily armored and equipped with a deadly gun, was already feared across the battlefield. Germany believed that with these weapons and forces, they could break through Soviet defenses and regain the initiative. But there was a problem, a very big one. The Soviets knew. Through intelligence networks and intercepted communications, Soviet leadership learned about the German plan in detail. They knew when it would begin. At this point, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin faced a critical decision. Some commanders wanted to attack first, to strike before the Germans could organize. But others argued for a different strategy. Wait. Let the Germans come, wear them down, then destroy them. In the end, Stalin agreed. What followed was one of the most extraordinary defensive preparations in history. The Soviets turned the Kursk region into a fortress. They didn't just build one defensive line, they built several. Layer after layer of defenses stretched across the battlefield. Trenches were dug across vast distances. Barbed wire was placed to slow infantry. Anti-tank guns were hidden in carefully chosen positions. Artillery units were positioned to cover every possible approach. And perhaps most importantly, they laid mines. Hundreds of thousands of mines. Some estimates say over 1 million. These minefields would become one of the deadliest obstacles the Germans faced. Behind these defensive lines, the Soviets held massive reserves, fresh armies and tank units ready to counterattack when the time was right. They were not just preparing to survive the attack, they were preparing to win. On July 5, 1943, the battle began. In the early hours of the morning, the Soviets launched a massive artillery barrage, attempting to disrupt German forces before they could begin their offensive. But despite this, the German attack went forward. From the north and south, German forces advanced. At first, everything seemed to follow the plan. But then, the reality of the Soviet defenses became clear. German tanks rolled forward, only to hit minefields. Explosions ripped through their formations. Tanks were destroyed or immobilized before they even reached the main defensive lines. Engineers were sent in to clear paths through the mines, but they were under constant fire. Every step forward cost time and lives. Then came the anti-tank guns. Hidden across the battlefield, Soviet guns opened fire on advancing German armor. From long distances and from concealed positions, they struck with deadly accuracy. German tanks were hit again and again. The advance slowed. Then it slowed even more. This was not the fast-moving blitzkrieg that Germany had used so successfully in the early years of the war. This was something different, something much worse. This was a war of attrition. In the north, German forces quickly became stuck. The Soviet defenses were too strong, too deep, too well prepared. In the south, however, the Germans managed to make more progress. They pushed forward, breaking through some defensive lines. But every kilometer gained came at a heavy cost. Tanks burned, soldiers fell, supplies ran low. The battlefield became a landscape of destruction. Days passed. The fighting grew more intense. And then came the turning point. On July 12th, near the village of Prokhorovka, one of the most violent clashes of the entire war took place. Soviet commanders launched a massive counterattack. Hundreds of tanks moved forward at once. Their goal was simple: stop the German advance at all costs. Instead of fighting from a distance, the Soviets charged directly toward the German lines. The distance between the two sides closed rapidly. Soon, tanks were fighting at point-blank range. This changed everything. At long distances, German tanks like the Tiger had a clear advantage. Their powerful guns could destroy enemy tanks before they got close. But at close range, that advantage disappeared. Now, it was chaos. Tanks fired shells into each other from just meters away. Some tanks rammed into their enemies. Others were destroyed in massive explosions. Smoke filled the air. Dust covered the battlefield. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Commanders struggled to control their units. Communication broke down. It was no longer about strategy. It was about survival. The Battle of Prokhorovka became one of the largest and most intense tank battles in history. And when it was over, the German advance had been stopped. But even as this battle raged, something else was happening far away. On July 10th, Allied forces invaded Sicily. This changed everything. Germany was now facing serious threats on multiple fronts. Hitler could no longer afford to focus everything on the Eastern Front. At the same time, losses at Kursk were mounting. The offensive was not going as planned. The quick victory Germany had hoped for was nowhere in sight. Faced with these realities, Hitler made a crucial decision. He ordered Operation Citadel to be called off. The offensive ended. Germany had failed. But for the Soviets, this was just the beginning. Almost immediately, they launched their own counteroffensives. Fresh Soviet forces moved forward, attacking weakened German positions. The German army, already exhausted and damaged, could not hold. They began to retreat. And they kept retreating. From this point on, the Red Army held the initiative. They pushed westward again and again, liberating territory and driving German forces back toward Europe. Kursk marked the last major German offensive in the east. After this, Germany would never again launch a large-scale attack like this on the Eastern Front. The balance of power had shifted permanently. The Battle of Kursk was more than just a military engagement. It was a turning point, a moment where preparation defeated aggression, where defense overcame offense, where patience outmatched desperation. Millions of soldiers took part in the battle. Thousands of tanks were destroyed. Entire landscapes were turned into burning ruins. And in the end, one truth stood above all. Kursk was the moment Nazi Germany lost its last real chance to win in the East. From that moment on, defeat was inevitable. Not immediate, not easy, but certain. Because after Kursk, the road to Berlin had begun.